My name is Emily Carver, and I'm 37 years old. I never thought I'd be the kind of person telling this story, but here I am, sitting in my small apartment in Denver on a snowy January evening, still trying to make sense of what happened last Christmas. My daughter Sophie is asleep in her room, finally peaceful after weeks of questions I couldn't answer. I guess it's time I tried to answer them myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least where this story really begins, 3 weeks before Christmas, when everything I thought I knew about my family started to unravel. I was standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of mac and cheese for Sophie's dinner, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister Jennifer's name, and I smiled as I answered. Jenny and I had always been close, or so I thought. She was 2 years older, married to a successful lawyer named Brad, with twin boys who were Sophie's age. They lived in a beautiful house in Cherry Hills Village, one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine. Jenny's voice was bright, that particular kind of brightness that usually meant she was about to ask for something. "How are you, sweetie?" "Good. Tired but good," I said, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder while I drained the pasta. Sophie had soccer practice today, and you know how that goes. She came home covered in mud and somehow still had energy to redesign her entire bedroom. Jenny laughed, but it sounded forced. She's such a handful. "Listen, I'm calling about Christmas. We're doing it at Mom and Dad's this year. You know, the whole family thing." I felt that familiar flutter of excitement. Christmas at my parents' house in Littleton was always magical. Dad would spend days stringing lights on every surface, and Mom would cook enough food to feed a small army. Sophie had been talking about it for weeks, asking if she could help Grandma make the sugar cookies, and if Grandpa would let her help him set up the train set in the basement. "That sounds perfect," I said. "Sophie's been asking about it constantly. She even started making presents for everyone. You should see the friendship bracelet she made for the twins." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I stopped stirring and frowned at the phone. "Jenny, you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here." Her voice had changed, become careful in a way that made my stomach clench. "Emily, about Christmas. We've been talking, as a family, and—" "What do you mean, as a family?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Well, with Mom and Dad getting older, and the house isn't as big as it used to feel, and with all the kids—" "Jenny, what are you trying to say?" Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, Brad saying something I couldn't make out, and one of the twins asking for help with homework. "The thing is, we're going to have 15 people this year. Brad's parents are coming, and his sister with her 3 kids, and you know how Mom gets stressed with too many people." My hand had stopped moving entirely. The mac and cheese sat forgotten on the stove. 15 people. Right. And the house is it's a lot, And we thought, maybe this year, you and Sophie could, I don't know, maybe do your own thing. Start your own traditions. The words hit me like cold water. I set the spoon down carefully, my hands suddenly shaking. "Are you telling me we're not invited to Christmas?" "It's not that you're not invited exactly. It's just, there's no room." "No room." I repeated the words, trying to make them make sense. "At Mom and Dad's house. The house where we grew up. The house with 6 bedrooms and a finished basement." "Emily, please don't make this harder than it has to be. You know how cramped it gets. And with Sophie being, you know how energetic she is. And sometimes she doesn't get along with the other kids." Something cold and terrible was spreading through my chest. "What do you mean, she doesn't get along with the other kids?" "She's just different. You know that. She's so intense about everything, and she gets upset when things don't go her way. And honestly, it makes everyone uncomfortable." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Sophie was different. She was diagnosed with ADHD when she was 7. And yes, she could be overwhelming sometimes. She felt everything deeply, got excited easily, and had meltdowns when she was overstimulated. But she was also the most loving, creative, passionate child I'd ever known. She painted pictures for everyone she cared about, wrote stories about magical worlds, and had a laugh that could light up any room. She's 10 years old, Jenny. I know, and we love her. We do. It's just, this year is already going to be stressful enough, and Mom specifically said she doesn't think she can handle what? Handle Sophie's issues. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I felt something inside me break, not dramatically, but quietly, like a crack in glass that you don't notice until the whole thing shatters. Her issues, I repeated. Emily, please understand. It's not personal. We're just trying to make it work for everyone. And everyone doesn't include my daughter. That's not fair. Fair. My voice was rising now, and I could hear Sophie's footsteps upstairs as she got ready for her bath. I forced myself to speak more quietly. Fair would be treating my child like she's part of this family. Fair would be making accommodations for a 10-year-old instead of just excluding her. We're not excluding her. It's complicated, Em. No, it's not complicated. It's cruel. The silence that followed felt like a chasm opening between us. When Jenny spoke again, her voice was defensive, the warmth completely gone. You know what, Emily? Maybe this is for the best. Maybe it's time you stopped expecting everyone else to cater to Sophie's needs. The world isn't going to accommodate her forever, and neither can we. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the phone, while the mac and cheese grew cold on the stove. Through the window, I could see snow beginning to fall. Those big, soft flakes that usually made me think of Christmas magic. Now they just looked cold. Mommy? Sophie's voice came from the stairs, and I quickly wiped my eyes, pasting on a smile before she appeared in the doorway. Her hair was damp from the bath, and she was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the unicorns that she'd had since she was 8, and refused to give up, even though they were too small. Hey, baby. Dinner's ready. She bounced into the kitchen, all energy and excitement. Can we talk about Christmas plans while we eat? I had the best idea for Grandpa's present. I want to make him a photo album of all our adventures this year, and I already picked out the pictures. And she stopped talking when she saw my face. Sophie had always been perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. It was part of what made social situations hard for her. She picked up on emotions that other kids missed, felt things too deeply, cared too much. Mommy, what's wrong? You look sad. I knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in mine. Her fingers were still wrinkled from the bath, and she smelled like the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using even though it was meant for younger kids. Sophie, we need to talk about Christmas. Her face lit up immediately. Oh, did Aunt Jenny call? Is that why you look upset? Are you sad because you're so excited? My heart broke a little more. No, sweetheart. Actually, there's been a change of plans. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly. And what kind of change? I took a deep breath, trying to find words that would protect her from the truth without lying outright. Well, it turns out that Grandma and Grandpa's house is going to be really, really crowded this year. So we're going to do our own Christmas. Just you and me. Sophie tilted her head, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to everything. But what about the sugar cookies with Grandma, and the train set with Grandpa? And giving everyone their presents. We can make our own sugar cookies, and we can set up that little train set you got last year. And maybe we can mail the presents, or deliver them another day. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her trying to make sense of this new reality. Finally, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were so much like my own. Did I do something wrong? The question hit me like a physical blow. No, baby. No, you didn't do anything wrong. This isn't about you. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. It was about her ADHD, about her intensity, about the way she didn't quite fit into the neat, quiet box that made everyone else comfortable. It was about a family that would rather exclude a child than make the effort to include her. Are you sure? Sophie's voice was small now, uncertain in a way that made my chest tight. Because sometimes I know I get too excited, and I talk too much, and I don't always remember to use my inside voice. Sophie, look at me. I waited until she met my eyes. You are perfect exactly the way you are. You are kind and creative and funny and smart, and anyone who can't see that is missing out. This is not about you doing anything wrong. She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in her expression. Will we still have a good Christmas? Just us. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair and the warmth of her small body against mine. We're going to have the best Christmas ever, I promise. And in that moment, standing in my kitchen with my daughter in my arms and snow falling outside the window, I meant it. I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise, but I was determined to try. The next few days passed in a blur of painful conversations. My mother called, her voice carefully neutral as she explained that they were just trying to keep things simple this year. My father, who had always been Sophie's biggest champion, couldn't even come to the phone. I could hear him in the background, his voice raised in what sounded like an argument. but he never spoke to me directly. My brother Michael, the youngest of the three of us, sent a text. "Sorry, Em. I tried to talk them out of it, but you know how it is. Maybe next year. Maybe next year." As if this year didn't matter. As if Sophie's heart didn't matter. The hardest part was watching Sophie try to process what was happening. She went through phases. First confusion, then a kind of forced cheerfulness as she tried to convince herself, and me, that this was actually exciting. She made lists of things we could do on Christmas morning, planned elaborate menus for our Christmas dinner, and threw herself into making presents with even more intensity than usual. But I caught her sometimes, staring out the window with the expression I'd never seen before, something that looked like resignation. She was too young for that look, too young to understand that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most will let you down in ways that leave scars. One evening, about a week before Christmas, I found her in her room, sitting on her bed with a box of craft supplies scattered around her. She was making something with red and green construction paper, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. "What are you working on, honey?" She looked up, and for a moment her face was bright with excitement. "Christmas cards. I thought maybe if I made really special ones for everyone, we could deliver them on Christmas Eve, and maybe they'd invite us to stay for hot chocolate or something." The hope in her voice was devastating. I sat down on the bed next to her, looking at the cards she'd made. They were beautiful in the way only a child's artwork could be, each one carefully crafted with glitter and stickers and messages written in her neat, careful handwriting. "Merry Christmas, Grandma and Grandpa. I love you so much. For Uncle Michael, you're the best uncle ever. To Aunt Jenny and Uncle Brad and the twins. Can't wait to see you. These are beautiful, Sophie. Do you think they'll like them? Do you think maybe if they see how much I love them, they'll remember that they love me too?" I pulled her close, fighting back tears. "Oh, sweetheart, they do love you. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense, even when they love you." She leaned against me, and we sat there for a while in comfortable silence. Outside, the snow was falling again, and Christmas lights from the neighboring apartments twinkled through her window. "Mommy, yeah, are we poor?" The question surprised me. "Why do you ask?" I was thinking maybe that's why there's no room for us. Like maybe we can't afford to bring enough food or presents, so they don't want us there. I felt something twist in my chest. We weren't poor, exactly, but we weren't well off either. I worked as a medical assistant at a family practice, and while it was enough to cover our basic needs, there wasn't much left over for extras. Sophie's school supplies came from the dollar store. Our Christmas presents were usually practical things she needed anyway, and her clothes came from thrift stores and hand-me-downs. But that wasn't why we weren't welcome. I knew that, even if I couldn't explain it to her. Money isn't the problem, baby. Sometimes families they forget what's really important. She nodded solemnly, then went back to her cards. I watched her work, adding more glitter to a snowman's hat, and I made a decision that surprised even me. "Sophie, what would you think about inviting some other people for Christmas dinner? People who might not have anywhere else to go?" She looked up, interested. "Like who?" "Well, I was thinking maybe Mrs. Chen from downstairs. She's all alone since her husband died, and I know she doesn't have any family nearby. And maybe Jake from the coffee shop. He mentioned that he was working on Christmas because he doesn't have anywhere to go." Sophie's face lit up with real excitement for the first time in days. "Really? We could have our own Christmas party?" "We could. We could make it really special, just for people who need somewhere to belong." She clapped her hands together, sending glitter flying. "Yes. And we could make extra cookies, and we could put up more decorations, and we could play Christmas music really loud." Watching her transform from sad resignation to genuine joy, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe this rejection from my family wasn't just an ending. Maybe it was a beginning. The next morning, Sophie woke up with the kind of energy that only comes from having a mission. She bounced into my bedroom at 6:30, her hair sticking up in every direction and her eyes bright with excitement. Mommy. I had the best dream about our Christmas party. We had a huge table with so much food, and everyone was laughing, and Mrs. Chen taught me how to make dumplings, and Jake brought his guitar and we all sang songs. I groaned and pulled a pillow over my head. "Sophie, it's Saturday morning. Can we have this conversation after coffee?" But she was already climbing onto my bed, bouncing slightly on the mattress. "No, we have to start planning now. We only have 6 days left. We need to make a list and go shopping and figure out how many people we can fit in our apartment and..." Okay, I sat up, running my hands through my hair, looking at her face, so full of hope and determination. I felt that same shift I'd experienced the night before. This wasn't just about salvaging Christmas anymore. This was about showing Sophie that when people disappoint you, you don't have to curl up and disappear. You can create something better. You're right. Let's make a list. We spent the morning at my small kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks and pens and Sophie's art supplies. She approached the planning with the same intensity she brought to everything else, creating color-coded lists and elaborate diagrams of how we could rearrange the furniture to fit more people. "Okay," she said, tapping her purple pen against her lips. "So far we have Mrs. Chen, Jake from the coffee shop, and us. That's 4 people. But I think we should invite more. Who else did you have in mind?" "Well, what about Mr. Rodriguez from the grocery store? He's always so nice to us, and he works really hard. And maybe that lady with the baby who lives at the end of the hall. I see her sometimes and she always looks tired." I smiled, watching her think through people who might need kindness. This was Sophie at her best. Empathetic, generous, seeing the world through a lens of compassion that most adults had lost somewhere along the way. Those are good ideas, but we should probably ask them first, right? We can't just assume they want to spend Christmas with strangers. "They won't be strangers if we invite them properly," Sophie declared with the confidence that only a 10-year-old could muster. "We'll make special invitations, and we'll tell them all about what we're planning, and they'll see how much fun it's going to be." The first person we approached was Mrs. Chen. She lived in the apartment directly below us, and I'd been meaning to check on her more often since her husband died 6 months ago. Sophie insisted on making a formal invitation, a piece of purple construction paper folded in half with careful lettering and drawings of Christmas trees. We knocked on her door that afternoon, and when she answered, I was struck by how small she looked. Mrs. Chen had always been petite, but grief seemed to have made her even more delicate, as if she might blow away in a strong wind. "Emily, Sophie." Her face lit up when she saw us. "What a lovely surprise." "Hi, Mrs. Chen," Sophie said, practically vibrating with excitement. "We have something for you." She thrust the invitation toward Mrs. Chen, who took it with curious eyes. I watched her face as she read Sophie's careful writing. "You are invited to the best Christmas ever, December 25th, 12 p.m., apartment 3B. There will be food and presents and friendship. Please come because Christmas is better when we're together." Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I worried that we'd overstepped, that maybe she wanted to be alone with her grief. "Oh, my dear girls," she said softly. "And this is the most beautiful invitation I've ever received." "So you'll come?" Sophie asked hopefully. "I would be honored." Mrs. Chen looked at me over Sophie's head. "But only if you let me bring something. I make excellent dumplings, and I've been wanting an excuse to cook for people again." Sophie clapped her hands together. "That's perfect. I dreamed about your dumplings." As we walked back upstairs, Sophie was practically glowing. She said yes. She's going to make dumplings. This is going to be the best Christmas ever. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting caught up in the planning, despite my lingering sadness about my family's rejection. Maybe this was what we needed. Not just Sophie, but me too. Maybe we both needed to learn that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to show up. Our next stop was the coffee shop where Jake worked. It was a small place called Mountain Brew, tucked between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. Jake was probably 25, with the kind of earnest face that made you want to trust him immediately. He'd been working there for about a year, and Sophie had developed a massive crush on him. Not romantic, but the kind of hero worship that kids sometimes get for young adults who treat them like real people. He was behind the counter when we walked in, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Sophie. "Hey there, Sophie." The usual. He always remembered her order: hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and a chocolate chip muffin. "Actually, we're not here for coffee today," Sophie announced importantly. "We're here on official business." Jake raised his eyebrows and leaned forward conspiratorially. "Official business? Should I be worried?" Sophie giggled and pulled out another invitation, this one decorated with coffee cups and musical notes. "We're having a Christmas party, and we want you to come." Jake took the invitation and read it carefully, his expression growing more thoughtful with each word. When he looked up, there was something vulnerable in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "You really want me to come to your Christmas dinner?" "Of course," Sophie said. Mommy said you don't have anywhere to go, and that's silly because you're our friend, and friends should be together on Christmas." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Sophie, we talked about this. We ask people nicely. We don't assume things about their lives. But Jake was smiling now, a real smile that reached his eyes. Actually, she's right. I was planning to work a double shift on Christmas, try to make some extra money and avoid thinking about being alone. So you'll come? Sophie asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. I'd love to come. And I'll bring my guitar, if that's okay. I know some Christmas songs. Sophie squealed with delight, and even I felt my heart lift. This was working. We were actually creating something special. The rest of the week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sophie threw herself into the project, with the kind of focused intensity that her teachers usually found problematic, but that I was learning to see as one of her greatest strengths. When Sophie cared about something, she cared completely. We invited Mr. Rodriguez from the grocery store, who accepted with tears in his eyes and promised to bring homemade tamales. The young mother from down the hall, her name was Maria, and her baby was named Angel, seemed overwhelmed by the invitation, but gratefully accepted. An elderly man named Frank, who lived alone in the building, offered to bring apple pie and stories from his time in the Navy. By Christmas Eve, we had 8 people confirmed for our dinner, plus baby Angel. Our small apartment was going to be packed, but Sophie had figured out a way to make it work. We'd moved the couch against the wall and borrowed a folding table from the building's community room. Sophie had made place cards for everyone, decorated with glitter and stickers and little drawings that captured something special about each person. But as Christmas morning approached, I found myself struggling with unexpected emotions. The silence from my family was deafening. No phone calls, no texts, no acknowledgement that we existed. Part of me had hoped that maybe one of them would realize what they were doing and reach out, but Christmas Eve came and went without a word. I was up early on Christmas morning, standing in the kitchen making coffee and staring out at the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The world looked clean and peaceful, but inside I felt raw and hollow. This was supposed to be Sophie's first Christmas without her extended family, and I was terrified that no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't be enough to fill that hole. Mommy? I turned to find Sophie in the doorway, still in her pajamas but wide awake. Merry Christmas, baby. She came over and hugged me, and I could feel some of the tension leave my body. This was what mattered. This moment, this child, this love that nobody could take away from us. I have something for you, she said, pulling back to look at me with serious eyes. But it's not a regular present. It's more like a promise. She reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded carefully into quarters. I unfolded it to find a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a Christmas tree, with words written in her careful handwriting. Dear Mommy, thank you for making this the best Christmas ever. I know it's sad that our family doesn't want us, but I'm glad because now I know that you will always choose me. Love, Sophie, P.S. We are our own family and that's better. I felt tears spring to my eyes as I read her words. Sophie, don't cry, Mommy. Unless they're happy tears. They're happy tears, I managed, pulling her close again. They're definitely happy tears. The morning flew by in a blur of cooking and decorating and last-minute preparations. Sophie insisted on setting the table with my grandmother's good china, the only valuable thing I'd kept when I moved out on my own. She arranged the place cards with military precision and put a small wrapped present at each place setting. What are those? I asked, nodding toward the presents. I made something special for everyone, Sophie said proudly. Since they're all coming to help us have a good Christmas, I wanted to give them something to remember it by. At noon exactly, there was a knock on the door. Sophie raced to answer it, and Mrs. Chen stood there holding a steaming pot, her face bright with anticipation. I hope you're hungry, she said, stepping inside and breathing in the aroma of roasting chicken and fresh bread. I may have made too many dumplings. One by one, our guests arrived. Jake came with his guitar and a bouquet of flowers he'd clearly picked up at the last minute, but that made Sophie feel like a princess. Mr. Rodriguez brought not just tamales but his whole family, his wife Rosa, and their teenage daughter Carmen, who immediately started helping in the kitchen. Maria arrived with baby Angel, looking nervous but grateful, and Frank brought not just apple pie, but stories that had us all laughing within minutes. By the time we sat down to eat, our small apartment was filled with warmth and laughter, and the kind of joy that can't be manufactured or forced. It rises naturally when people choose to care for each other. Sophie stood up before we started eating, tapping her fork against her glass like she'd seen in movies. "I want to make a toast," she announced solemnly. "A toast?" Jake asked, grinning. This is pretty fancy, Sophie. It's a special occasion," she replied with dignity. "I want to say thank you to everyone for coming to our Christmas. I know we're not your real family, but you're here anyway, and that makes you special. My mom told me that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, and I choose all of you." She raised her glass of apple juice, and everyone else raised their glasses, coffee mugs and water glasses and whatever we could find, and we toasted to chosen family, to kindness, to the magic of Christmas that has nothing to do with expensive presents or perfect houses, and everything to do with people who decide to show up for each other. As we ate and talked and laughed, I found myself watching Sophie. She was in her element, moving from person to person, asking questions and telling stories and making sure everyone felt included. She helped Mrs. Chen explain how to make dumplings, listened intently to Frank's Navy stories, and sang along when Jake played Christmas carols on his guitar. This was Sophie at her best, and seeing her like this, confident, joyful, surrounded by people who appreciated her exactly as she was, I realized something important. My family hadn't rejected Sophie because she was difficult or overwhelming. They'd rejected her because they were afraid of her intensity, her authenticity, her refusal to dim her light to make others more comfortable. But here, in this room full of people who had their own struggles and sorrows, Sophie's light was exactly what everyone needed. After dinner, Sophie insisted on giving out her presents. She'd made each person a small photo frame decorated with their name and filled with a picture she'd drawn of them doing something she'd noticed they loved. Mrs. Chen got a picture of herself cooking. Jake got one of himself playing guitar. Mr. Rodriguez got one of himself smiling behind the grocery store counter. When she got to Maria, she presented her with a drawing of her holding baby Angel. But she'd added something special, a small figure that looked like Sophie standing nearby. "That's me helping you take care of Angel," Sophie explained, "because sometimes moms need help, and I'm really good with babies." Maria started crying then, and pulled Sophie into a hug. "You're very good with babies," she whispered, "and very good with hearts too." As the afternoon wore on and people began to leave, each one stopped to thank us. But more than that, they thanked Sophie specifically. They saw what my family couldn't or wouldn't see, that her differentness wasn't a problem to be managed, but a gift to be celebrated. Mrs. Chen was the last to leave, and she hugged Sophie tightly before turning to me. That little girl of yours," she said quietly. "She has something special. She sees people, really sees them. Don't you ever let anyone convince you that's a flaw." After everyone was gone and the dishes were washed and Sophie was finally in bed, exhausted but happy, I sat in my living room looking at the remnants of our celebration. There were still bits of glitter on the table from Sophie's decorations, and the apartment smelled like a wonderful mixture of all the different foods we'd shared. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. No missed calls, no text messages, no acknowledgement from my family that this day had happened at all. And for the first time since Jenny's phone call 3 weeks ago, that silence didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. We'd done it. We'd created our own Christmas, our own tradition, our own family, and it had been better than anything I could have imagined. The week after Christmas felt different in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. Sophie went back to school with a confidence I hadn't seen in months, armed with stories about our Christmas celebration and pictures she'd drawn of all our new friends. I returned to work at the family practice where I'd been a medical assistant for 5 years, but something had shifted inside me. Dr. Martinez, the physician I worked most closely with, noticed it immediately. "You look different, Emily," she said, as we reviewed patient charts on the Tuesday after New Year's. "Lighter, somehow." I smiled, thinking about how to explain it. "We had a really good Christmas. With your family." The question hung in the air for a moment. 6 months ago, I would have felt obligated to explain, to make excuses, to soften the truth, but now I just shook my head. "No, we made our own family this year. It was exactly what we needed." Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow but didn't press, which was one of the things I appreciated about her. She was a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, the sort of doctor who remembered her patients' children's names and always had time to listen. Working with her had taught me a lot about the kind of person I wanted to be. It was Thursday of that week when everything changed again. I was updating patient files in the afternoon when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. and for a moment my finger hovered over the decline button. I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever conversation was coming, but something made me answer. "Hello, Mom. Emily." Her voice was strained, formal in a way that immediately put me on guard. "We need to talk." "Okay." I stepped into the supply closet for privacy, closing the door behind me. "What about Christmas? About what happened?" I waited, but she didn't continue. The silence stretched between us until I finally spoke. "What about Christmas, Mom? Jenny told me you hung up on her, that you were upset about our decision. Our decision. Not her decision, or the family's decision, but our decision, as if I had somehow been part of choosing my own daughter's exclusion. I was upset that my 10-year-old daughter was told she wasn't welcome at Christmas because she makes people uncomfortable. That's not what we said. It's exactly what Jenny said." Another pause. Then, in a voice that sounded tired, "Emily, you have to understand. It's not that we don't love Sophie. We do. But she's challenging. And Christmas is already stressful enough without having to worry about meltdowns and disruptions." There it was again. That word, challenging. As if Sophie's ADHD was a character flaw rather than a neurological difference. As if her intensity and passion were problems to be managed rather than gifts to be celebrated. "She's 10 years old, Mom. She's a child who needed her family, and you turned your back on her." "We didn't turn our back. You told her there wasn't room for her, in a house with 6 bedrooms. On Christmas. Emily, please. I'm calling because I want to make this right. We could have you both over for dinner this weekend, maybe. We could do a belated Christmas." I closed my eyes, leaning against the supply closet wall. A month ago, this call would have meant everything to me. The possibility of reconciliation, of Sophie getting the family acceptance she craved, of things going back to normal. But now, after watching Sophie bloom in a room full of people who chose to love her exactly as she was, the offer felt hollow. "Mom, Sophie doesn't need a consolation prize. She had the best Christmas of her life with people who actually wanted her there." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means she learned something important. She learned that the people who really matter are the ones who show up when it counts." There was a long silence, and when my mother spoke again, her voice was hurt and defensive. "We've always shown up for Sophie. We've been patient with her behavior. We've made accommodations. You've tolerated her." I interrupted. "There's a difference. That's not fair. You know what's not fair. A 10-year-old spending Christmas morning asking me if she did something wrong. A little girl making extra special presents for grandparents who couldn't be bothered to make room for her at their table." I could hear my mother's breathing on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might actually hear me, might understand what I was trying to say. "Emily," she said finally, "I think you're being dramatic about this. Sophie is fine. Children are resilient. She'll get over it." And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. The assumption that because Sophie was a child, her feelings didn't matter as much, that hurt and rejection were just things she should learn to accept. She shouldn't have to get over it, Mom. She should be able to count on her family. She can count on us. We're trying to include you now that Christmas is over and it doesn't matter anymore. Another silence, longer this time. "And I don't know what you want from me, Emily." The thing was, I did know what I wanted. I wanted her to apologize. I wanted her to acknowledge that they'd hurt Sophie, that they'd chosen convenience over compassion. I wanted her to fight for Sophie the way I fought for her every day. But I was beginning to understand that wanting something didn't make it possible. "I want you to see Sophie for who she really is," I said quietly. "Not as a problem to be managed, but as the amazing kid who deserves to be loved without conditions. We do love her. Then show her. Don't just tell me you love her while treating her like she's too much trouble to include in your life." The conversation ended without resolution, both of us frustrated and hurt. I sat in that supply closet for a few more minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me felt guilty for being so harsh with my mother, but a bigger part felt relieved. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to my family not just for myself, but for Sophie. When I got home that evening, Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through a math worksheet. She looked up when I walked in, and her face immediately showed concern. "Mommy, you look upset. Did something bad happen at work?" I sat down across from her, marveling again at her perceptiveness. "Grandma called today." Sophie's expression became carefully neutral, the way it did when she was trying to protect herself from disappointment. "Oh, what did she want?" "She wanted to invite us for dinner this weekend." like a late Christmas. Sophie considered this for a moment, twirling her pencil between her fingers. Did you say yes? I wanted to talk to you about it first. What do you think? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to worry I'd put too much responsibility on her shoulders. She was still just 10 years old, still young enough to want her grandmother's approval even after being hurt. Do they want me there? She asked finally. Like, really want me there? Or do they just feel bad? The question broke my heart and made me proud at the same time. Even at 10, Sophie understood the difference between genuine welcome and obligatory inclusion. I think they feel bad, I said honestly. I think they realize they hurt us, and they want to fix it. But do they think I'm still too much? I reached across the table and took her hand. Sophie, listen to me. You are not too much. You are exactly the right amount of Sophie, and anyone who can't see that is missing out. She smiled at that, but it was a sad smile. I know you think that, Mommy, but what about them? It was such a mature question, such a clear-eyed assessment of the situation, that I felt my chest tighten with emotion. How had I raised such a wise child, and how had my family failed to see the incredible person she was becoming? I don't think they understand yet, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean we have to accept being treated like we don't matter. Sophie nodded slowly, then went back to her math worksheet. After a few minutes, she looked up again. Can I tell you something? Always. I don't want to go to Grandma's house. I know I should want to, because they're family and I love them. But I don't want to sit there wondering if I'm being too loud or too excited or too... me. She paused, then continued in a smaller voice. And our Christmas was better, with Mrs. Chen and Jake and everyone. They liked me the way I am. I felt tears prick my eyes. They more than liked you, baby. They loved you. And you're right. Our Christmas was better. So can we say no? Is it okay to say no to family if they make you feel bad about yourself? It was such an important question, one that I was still learning the answer to myself. Yes, I said firmly. It's not only okay, it's necessary sometimes. We get to choose to be around people who make us feel good about ourselves. Relief flooded her face, and she went back to her homework with renewed focus. I sat there watching her, feeling something settle into place inside me. We were going to be okay, more than okay. We were going to thrive. The next few weeks passed peacefully. Sophie threw herself into a new art project, creating a scrapbook of our Christmas celebration with photos and drawings and written memories from each of our guests. Mrs. Chen had given her an old photo album, and Sophie was filling it with loving care. This is going to be our family album, she explained to me one evening as she glued down a picture Jake had taken of all of us around the dinner table. Not the family we were born with, but the family we chose. I helped her write captions under each photo, and as we worked together, I realized that she was creating something important. Not just a record of one special day, but proof that we could build our own traditions, our own sense of belonging. It was mid-January when the second phone call came. This time it was Jenny, and her voice was different. Less confident, more uncertain. Emily? It's me. Hi, Jenny. I've been thinking about Christmas, about what happened. I waited, not sure where this was going. Michael talked to me. He said some things that, well, that made me think. What kinds of things? About Sophie. About how we've been treating her. Jenny's voice was quiet, almost ashamed. He said he watched her at Tommy's birthday party last year. Really watched her. And he realized that she's not disruptive. She's just enthusiastic. And that maybe the problem isn't her behavior but our expectations. I felt something cautious unfurl in my chest. Michael said that. He did. And he said something else too. He said that if someone had told him as a kid that he was too much trouble to include, it would have broken his heart. And that Sophie's heart is probably already broken. And we did that. There was a long pause, and I could hear Jenny crying softly on the other end of the line. Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about Christmas. And I'm sorry about the phone call. And I'm sorry that it took Michael making me feel like garbage for me to see what we did wrong. I closed my eyes, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that someone in my family was finally getting it. Anger that it had taken this long. Sadness for all the time that had been lost. Thank you for apologizing, I said quietly. That means a lot. Is there any way? Could we try again? Could we maybe take Sophie and the twins somewhere fun? Just us? Let them get to know each other without all the family pressure? The offer was tempting, but I thought about Sophie's question. Do they want me there? Really want me there? Or do they just feel bad? I need to think about it, Jenny. And I need to talk to Sophie. She's been hurt. And I won't put her in a situation where she feels like she has to prove she's worthy of love. I understand. I want to try to fix this, if you'll let me. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about second chances and forgiveness and what we owe to family. Sophie was in her room, probably working on her scrapbook or reading one of the books Jake had recommended. She seemed happy, settled, confident in a way she hadn't been before Christmas. Did we need my family's acceptance to be complete? Or had we already found something better? That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, I told her about Jenny's call. Aunt Jenny wants to apologize, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. She realizes that Christmas wasn't fair to you. Sophie considered this, her expression serious in the dim light from her bedside lamp. Does she want to be friends again? I think she wants to try. She suggested maybe we could all go somewhere together, you and me and her and the twins, somewhere fun where you could all just be kids. Would Uncle Brad be there? She didn't mention him. Why? He's the one who always looks at me like I'm doing something wrong, even when I'm not. I felt a familiar flash of protective anger. Sophie was so perceptive, so aware of how adults saw her, and Brad had never been good at hiding his discomfort with her energy. If we did something with Aunt Jenny, it would just be her and the twins. But Sophie, we don't have to do anything. We're happy the way things are, aren't we? She nodded, then was quiet for a long moment. Can I ask you something, Mommy? Of course. If I say I want to try with Aunt Jenny, and it doesn't work out, will you be disappointed in me? The question caught me off guard. Why would I be disappointed in you? Because you want our family to love me, and if I can't make them love me, you might be sad. I felt my heart break a little. Even in her wisdom and newfound confidence, Sophie was still carrying the weight of trying to be lovable enough, still feeling responsible for other people's failures to see her worth. Oh, sweetheart. I smoothed her hair back from her face. Listen to me very carefully. Whether or not Aunt Jenny and I figure out how to be family again has nothing to do with you being lovable. You are already completely, perfectly lovable. If someone can't see that, it's their problem, not yours. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. I think maybe I want to try, she said, but just with Aunt Jenny and the twins, and somewhere fun where we can be loud if we want to. Okay, we'll try. But the moment you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, we leave. Deal? Deal. As I turned off her light and headed to my own room, I felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. We'd built something beautiful from the ashes of Christmas disappointment, and I wasn't willing to let anyone damage that. But maybe, just maybe, we could expand our chosen family to include some of the people we'd been born to. Only time would tell if they were ready to choose us back. 2 weeks later, Jenny and I stood awkwardly in the parking lot of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, watching our children through the glass doors of the entrance. Sophie was already deep in conversation with my nephew Tyler, pointing excitedly at something in the dinosaur exhibit brochure, while his twin brother Mason hung back slightly, still uncertain about this reunion. She looks good, Jenny said quietly, and I could hear something like wonder in her voice. Confident. I followed her gaze to Sophie, who was indeed radiant with excitement. She'd been looking forward to this outing for days, not with the desperate need for approval that used to characterize her interactions with family, but with genuine enthusiasm for sharing something she loved. The museum was one of our favorite places, somewhere Sophie could be as curious and energetic as she wanted without anyone telling her to calm down. She is confident, I said. And she's learned that she doesn't have to shrink herself to make other people comfortable. Jenny winced slightly at that, but she didn't argue. We'd had several phone conversations over the past 2 weeks, and to her credit, she'd listened when I explained how Sophie experienced the world, how her ADHD made her more intense but also more creative, more empathetic, more alive than most kids her age. I want to understand, Jenny had said during our last conversation. I want to do better. Now, watching Sophie explain something about pterodactyls to Tyler with animated hand gestures, I felt cautiously hopeful that maybe she meant it. Should we go in? Jenny asked, shouldering her purse. Before they decide they don't need us and start their own adventure? We made our way through the museum slowly, letting the kids set the pace. Sophie was in her element, reading every placard aloud, asking thoughtful questions, making connections between what she was seeing and things she'd learned in school or read in books. Tyler, who was typically more reserved, seemed to be caught up in her enthusiasm, while Mason gradually warmed up as Sophie made sure to include him in every discovery. "Look at this," Sophie called out as we entered the space exhibit. "It's a real meteorite. Tyler, Mason, come feel how smooth it is. It traveled through space for millions of years just to end up here where we could touch it." The boys rushed over, and I watched Jenny's face as she observed the interaction. Sophie wasn't just sharing information. She was sharing wonder. She had a gift for making ordinary moments feel magical, for helping other people see the world through her eyes. "She's a natural teacher," Jenny murmured to me as we followed the kids through the exhibits. "She is. Her teachers don't always appreciate it, but she loves helping other people learn new things." We were in the planetarium, sitting in the dark, watching a show about galaxies, when it happened. The narrator was describing the birth of stars, and Sophie, caught up in the beauty and vastness of what she was seeing, let out a soft wow of amazement. The person sitting behind us immediately shushed her, loudly and rudely. I felt Sophie stiffen beside me, and I could practically feel her shrinking into herself, remembering all the times she'd been told she was too loud, too much, too excited about everything. But before I could say anything, Tyler leaned over and whispered, "That was really cool, Sophie. I didn't know stars were born like that." And Mason, not to be outdone by his brother, added, "Yeah, and your wow was way quieter than that guy's shush." Sophie's face lit up in the dim planetarium light, and she whispered back, "Wait until you see the part about black holes. It's going to blow your mind." Jenny reached over and squeezed my hand, and when I looked at her, I could see tears in her eyes. She was finally seeing what I'd been trying to tell her, that Sophie's enthusiasm wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but a gift to be celebrated. After the show, we decided to grab lunch in the museum cafe. The kids were chattering excitedly about everything they'd seen, and for the first time in months, I felt like we might actually be rebuilding something real with this part of my family. That's when Jenny's phone rang. "Oh, it's Brad," she said, glancing at the screen. "I should take this. He's probably wondering how things are going." She stepped away from the table, and I could hear pieces of the conversation, her voice growing more tense with each exchange. When she came back, her expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Brad wants us to come home. He says we've been here long enough, and he needs me to help with something." The kids were still talking animatedly about the planetarium show, but I could see Sophie's radar going up, that hypervigilance that kicked in whenever she sensed adult tension. "We just got here," I said carefully. "We haven't even seen half the museum yet." "I know, but..." Jenny looked torn, glancing between her phone and the kids. "He gets really stressed when his routine is disrupted, and I guess he wasn't expecting us to be gone this long." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Jenny, we planned to spend the whole day here. You told him that." "I did, but you know how he is. He doesn't really understand why I needed to do this in the first place." And there it was, the real issue. Brad had never approved of this reconciliation attempt. He'd tolerated it because Jenny had insisted, but he wasn't actually supportive of rebuilding our relationship or including Sophie in their lives. "Mommy," Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. "Is everything okay?" I looked at my daughter, seeing the familiar worry creeping into her expression, and I felt a surge of protective anger. We'd been having such a good time. For the first time in months, Sophie was relaxed and happy with her cousins, and now that was being threatened by the same old family dynamics that had excluded her in the first place. "Everything's fine, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "Aunt Jenny just needs to check on something." But Sophie was too perceptive, and she'd gotten too good at reading the subtext of adult conversations. "Does Uncle Brad want us to leave?" she asked directly, her voice matter of fact, but her eyes showing hurt. Jenny flushed red. "No, sweetheart, it's not that." "It's okay," Sophie interrupted with a dignity that broke my heart. "I understand. Some people don't like it when plans change." She started gathering up her museum map and the small notebook where she'd been jotting down interesting facts, her movements careful and controlled. Tyler and Mason looked confused, not understanding why the fun was suddenly ending. "We don't have to go," Tyler said to his mother. "Dad can handle whatever it is by himself." "Yeah," Mason added. "This is way more fun than being at home." I watched Jenny struggle with the decision, torn between her husband's demands and her genuine desire to make things right with us. For a moment, I thought she might choose us, might stand up to Brad and insist on keeping her commitment to Sophie. But then her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it with a sigh. "He's really upset," she said apologetically. "I think we need to go." The ride back to Jenny's house was quiet, the excitement of the morning deflated by the abrupt ending. Sophie stared out the window, and I could see her processing what had happened, trying to make sense of yet another rejection from her family. When we pulled into Jenny's driveway, Brad was waiting outside, his arms crossed and his expression stern. He barely acknowledged Sophie and me, focusing his attention on Jenny and the boys. "You were supposed to be back 2 hours ago," he said without preamble. "I had things planned." "I'm sorry," Jenny said, her voice automatic, apologetic. "We lost track of time." Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt and looked at me. "Can we go home now, Mommy?" There was no anger in her voice, no dramatic upset, just a quiet acceptance that hurt more than any tantrum would have. "Of course, baby." As we said our goodbyes, Tyler hugged Sophie tightly. "That was the best museum trip ever," he whispered to her. "I'm sorry Dad made us leave early." Mason nodded in agreement. "Maybe we can go back sometime. Just us kids." Sophie smiled at them, a real smile that showed me she didn't blame her cousins for their father's behavior. "I'd like that. And next time, I'll show you the mineral exhibit. They have rocks that glow under special lights." Jenny walked us to our car, her face troubled. "Emily, I'm sorry about how this ended." "I really am. I know you are," I said, and I meant it. "But Jenny, this is exactly what I was talking about. Sophie can't be an afterthought in your life. She can't be the thing you fit in around Brad's comfort level." "I know. I'll talk to him. I'll make him understand." "Will you?" I interrupted gently, because today he made it pretty clear that we're not a priority. And Sophie is smart enough to see that. Jenny looked at Sophie, who was already buckled into the passenger seat, looking small and tired. "She had such a good time," Jenny said softly. "Did you see how excited she got about the planetarium? And the way she included the boys in everything? That's who Sophie is," I said. "That's who she's always been. The question is whether your family is ready to make space for her to be herself." The drive home was quiet, until Sophie finally spoke up. "I'm not sad," she announced, though I hadn't asked. "I mean, I am a little sad that we had to leave early, but I'm not sad. What's the difference? Sad is when you think it's your fault, or when you think things will never get better. But I'm just regular sad because something fun ended too soon." I glanced over at her, marveling again at her emotional intelligence. That's a very wise way to think about it. Mrs. Chen taught me that. She said there are different kinds of sad, and some of them mean something's wrong with you, but some of them just mean something's wrong with the situation. We stopped at a red light, and I reached over to squeeze her hand. "What do you think about today overall?" Sophie considered this seriously. "I think Aunt Jenny is trying to be better, and Tyler and Mason are really nice, but I think Uncle Brad doesn't want us in his family, and that makes it hard for everyone else. How do you feel about that?" "I feel like maybe some people aren't ready to be our family yet, and that's okay, because we already have a really good family with Mrs. Chen and Jake and everyone." The light turned green, and as we drove through our neighborhood toward home, I felt a profound sense of pride in my daughter. She was learning to protect her own heart without becoming bitter, to hope without becoming desperate, to love herself enough to walk away from situations that didn't serve her. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Jenny called. "I talked to Brad," she said without preamble. "About today, about Sophie, about everything. How did that go?" "Not well." Her voice was tired, defeated. "He doesn't understand why I'm trying to fix this. He says Sophie is fine the way things are, that she's learned to adapt, and that stirring things up is just going to cause more problems." I felt a familiar anger rise in my chest. She's learned to adapt. She's 10 years old, Jenny. She shouldn't have to adapt to being unwelcome in her own family. "I know. I tried to explain that, but he thinks you're being dramatic. He thinks Sophie's ADHD isn't as big a deal as you make it out to be, and that you're using it as an excuse to demand special treatment." The words hit me like a slap. Special treatment? Like being included in family events? "I'm just telling you what he said." "I don't agree with him. Don't you?" The question came out sharper than I intended, because when he called today and told you to come home, you dropped everything and cut our day short. That doesn't sound like disagreeing to me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Emily, my marriage isn't perfect, but it's what I have. I can't just ignore Brad's feelings because you want me to. I'm not asking you to ignore his feelings. I'm asking you to consider Sophie's feelings too. I'm asking you to be the aunt she deserves. I want to be. but I can't do it if it's going to destroy my marriage. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that statement. Jenny was asking me to understand her impossible position, but I kept thinking about Sophie's dignity in the face of yet another rejection, her quiet acceptance of being treated as less important than an adult man's convenience. "And then I guess you have to decide what matters more," I said quietly. "Your marriage or your relationship with your niece. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Jenny, but we still get to choose how we respond to that unfairness. We can either stand up for the people we love, or we can enable the people who hurt them." When we hung up, I felt hollow and sad, but also strangely peaceful. I'd said what I needed to say, and whatever happened next was out of my control. What I could control was making sure Sophie knew that she was valued, that she was loved, that she never had to settle for crumbs of affection from people who should have been giving her whole meals. I checked on her before going to bed, and found her sitting up reading one of the books Jake had lent her, a flashlight under the covers, even though she was allowed to keep her lamp on. "What you reading, Sneaky?" I asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. She grinned and showed me the cover, a book about a girl who befriends dragons. It's about this kid who's different from everyone else, but then she finds out that the things that make her different are actually superpowers. "Sounds familiar?" I said, smoothing her hair back. "Any good? Really good. The girl reminds me of me, except instead of ADHD, she can talk to dragons." I laughed, and Sophie giggled too. "You know what, baby? I think you've got some pretty amazing superpowers yourself." "Like what?" "Like seeing the best in people, like making everyone around you feel more excited about life, like loving people so completely that they can't help but love you back." Sophie smiled, a sleepy, contented smile. "Those are pretty good superpowers." "The best kind," I agreed, kissing her forehead. "Now get some sleep, Dragon Whisperer." As I turned off her light and headed to my own room, I felt a sense of closure settling over me. We'd given my family a chance to do better, and some of them, Jenny, Tyler, Mason, had shown real potential. But we couldn't force love where it didn't exist, and we couldn't sacrifice our own peace for other people's comfort. Sophie was learning that lesson too, in her own wise, 10-year-old way. And maybe that was the most important gift I could give her, the knowledge that she was worthy of love, exactly as she was, and the strength to walk away from anything less than that. Our chosen family was waiting for us. The people who saw Sophie's light and chose to celebrate it rather than dim it. That was enough. We were enough. 3 months later, on a warm April morning, I stood in my kitchen making pancakes while Sophie sat at the table working on invitations. Not invitations to another family gathering that might fall apart, but invitations to something entirely our own, a spring celebration to thank the people who had become our chosen family. "How do you spell appreciation?" Sophie asked, pausing in her careful lettering. "APPRECIATION, I spelled out, flipping a pancake. "What's the invitation for again?" "It's for our un-Easter party," Sophie announced proudly. "Since Easter is about new beginnings and spring and stuff, I thought we should have a party to celebrate our new family and all the good things that happened since Christmas. Our un-Easter party." I smiled, loving how Sophie's mind worked, how she could take traditional concepts and make them her own. Over the past few months, she'd done that with a lot of things, creating new traditions, new ways of thinking about family and belonging. The changes in Sophie since our Christmas revelation had been remarkable. She was still the same enthusiastic, creative, passionate child she'd always been, but she carried herself differently now. There was a confidence in her that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally, a security that allowed her to be even more generous with her own love. At school, her teacher had noticed the difference. "Sophie seems more settled," Mrs. Rodriguez had told me at the last parent conference. "She's still energetic and creative, but she's not seeking approval the way she used to. She seems to genuinely like herself," and she did. That was the most beautiful part of all of this. Sophie had learned to like herself, not despite her ADHD, not by trying to hide her intensity, but because of all the things that made her uniquely herself. "Mommy, look." Sophie held up the invitation she was working on. It was for Mrs. Chen, decorated with tiny drawings of dumplings and flowers, with the words, "Thank you for being the best adopted grandma ever," written in Sophie's neat handwriting. "That's beautiful, honey. I'm sure Mrs. Chen will love it." The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID before answering. It was Jake from the coffee shop, and Sophie immediately perked up when she heard his voice. "Is that Jake?" "Can I talk to him?" I handed her the phone, and she launched into an excited explanation of the un-Easter party while I finished making breakfast. Watching her chat easily with Jake, I marveled at how naturally she'd built these relationships. She wasn't performing, or trying to be what she thought adults wanted her to be. She was just being Sophie, and these people loved her for it. "Maybe Jake wants to know if he can bring his girlfriend," Sophie announced, covering the phone with her hand. "Her name is Maria, and she's really nice, and she likes art." "Of course he can bring her," I said. "The more the merrier." After Sophie finished her call, we sat down to eat breakfast together. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of birds outside our window and the gentle hum of life in our building. It was a peaceful quiet, not the heavy silence of being excluded, but the comfortable quiet of being exactly where we belonged. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" Sophie said, cutting her pancakes into precise squares the way she always did. "Always. Do you ever miss them? Grandma and Grandpa and everyone." It was a question she'd asked variations of over the past few months, and each time I tried to give her an honest answer that wouldn't burden her with my own complicated feelings. "I miss the idea of them," I said carefully. "I miss what I thought we had, or what I hoped we could have, but I don't miss feeling like we had to be different people to earn their love." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "I miss Tyler and Mason sometimes. They were really fun at the museum. I know you do, and that's okay. You can miss people and still know that you made the right choice." We hadn't heard from Jenny in over a month. She'd called a few times after the museum incident, trying to find some middle ground between Brad's demands and Sophie's needs, but it had become clear that no such middle ground existed. The last conversation we'd had, Jenny had sounded defeated. "I can't change his mind, Emily," she'd said. "I've tried everything I can think of, but he's convinced that you're being dramatic and that Sophie needs to learn to fit in better." "Then I guess that's our answer," I'd replied, feeling sad but not surprised. The hardest part hadn't been accepting that Brad would never change, but watching Jenny choose her marriage over her relationship with us. I understood her reasoning. Divorce is complicated, especially with children involved, but it still hurt to see her prioritize her husband's comfort over her niece's well-being. Michael had reached out a few times, sending Sophie funny memes and asking how she was doing. He seemed genuinely remorseful about Christmas, and had even suggested that maybe he could take Sophie on outings sometimes, just the two of them. But those plans had never materialized, and I suspected that pressure from the rest of the family had convinced him to back off. My parents had sent a birthday card in February, a generic card with a $20 bill, and a note that said, "Hope you have a wonderful day, Sophie." No phone call, no visit, no acknowledgement of the months that had passed since Christmas. Sophie had looked at the card for a long time, then put it on her dresser next to the photos from our Christmas celebration and the friendship bracelets Tyler and Mason had made for her at the museum. "It's nice that they remembered," she'd said with a maturity that broke my heart. "But it doesn't really change anything, does it?" No, it didn't change anything. Because real love isn't something you can mail in a card or express with $20 bills. Real love shows up. Real love makes room. Real love sees you as you are and celebrates what it finds. That's what we'd found with our chosen family, and that's what we were celebrating with our un-Easter party. Over the next few days, Sophie threw herself into party planning with characteristic enthusiasm. She made personalized invitations for everyone, planned games and activities, and even convinced me to let her help cook some of the food. "I want to make something special for everyone," she explained as we stood in the grocery store with a list that had grown far beyond what I'd originally budgeted for. "Mrs. Chen is teaching me how to make pot stickers, and I want to make Jake's favorite cookies. And Mr. Rodriguez said he'd help me make tres leches cake." Looking at our overflowing cart, I felt a moment of anxiety about the expense. Money was always tight, and spending this much on a party felt extravagant. But then I looked at Sophie's face, glowing with excitement and generosity, and I realized this wasn't just a party. This was an investment in the relationships that had saved us both. "You know what?" I said, adding another bag of flour to the cart. "Let's make this the best un-Easter party ever." The night before the party, Sophie was so excited she could barely sleep. I found her in the kitchen at 10 o'clock, double-checking that we had enough plates and making last-minute adjustments to the decorations she'd made. "What if they don't come?" she asked suddenly, voicing the worry that I suspected had been lurking beneath all her excitement. "They'll come," I said confidently. "These are people who love you, Sophie. They're not going to let you down. But what if something happens? What if they get busy or forget or—" I knelt down and took her hands, looking into her worried eyes. "Sophie, Remember what you learned about Christmas, about the difference between people who really want to be with you and people who just feel obligated." She nodded. "These people choose to be in our lives. They don't have to be here. They want to be here. That's the difference." She smiled then, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Yeah, you're right. Jake even asked if he could bring anything. And Mrs. Chen has been talking about this party for days." "Exactly. Now go to bed, party planner. Tomorrow is going to be a big day." The morning of the un-Easter party dawned sunny and warm, with the kind of spring light that makes everything feel possible. Sophie was up early, putting finishing touches on the decorations and setting up the games she'd planned. At noon exactly, there was a knock on the door. Sophie raced to answer it, and Mrs. Chen stood there holding a covered dish and wearing her biggest smile. "Happy un-Easter," Mrs. Chen announced, stepping inside and hugging Sophie tightly. "I brought spring rolls and pot stickers, and I can't wait to see what you've been cooking." One by one, our guests arrived. Jake came with his girlfriend Maria, who turned out to be a kindergarten teacher with a warm laugh and an easy way with Sophie. Mr. Rodriguez brought his whole family again, including his mother-in-law, who spoke no English, but communicated her affection through smiles and extra helpings of food. Frank arrived with stories and a new apple pie recipe he'd been wanting to try. Maria from down the hall came with baby Angel, who had grown so much since Christmas, and was now crawling everywhere and charming everyone he met. But the biggest surprise was when there was a knock on the door at 12:30, and I opened it to find Tyler standing there with a nervous smile. "Tyler!" Sophie shrieked, launching herself into his arms. "What are you doing here?" "My mom dropped me off," he said, hugging her back. "She said she had some errands to run and wondered if I could hang out here for a while." I looked past him to the parking lot and saw Jenny's car pulling away. For a moment, I felt a flash of the old hurt. Was she just using us for babysitting? But then I saw the genuine joy on both kids' faces, and I decided it didn't matter why he was here. What mattered was that he was here. "Mason couldn't come," Tyler explained to Sophie. "He has a soccer game, but he made you something." He pulled out a friendship bracelet in Sophie's favorite colors, and her face lit up as she put it on immediately. "This is the best surprise ever," she declared. "Come on, you have to meet everyone." I watched Sophie introduce Tyler to our chosen family, including him seamlessly in the group, just as she had at Christmas. Mrs. Chen immediately started teaching him how to fold dumplings, while Jake let him strum his guitar between songs. The party was everything Sophie had hoped for and more. We played games, shared stories, ate too much food, and laughed until our sides hurt. Baby Angel took his first steps during the party, right into Frank's waiting arms, and everyone cheered as if they were his grandparents. But the most meaningful moment came when Sophie stood up, just as she had at Christmas, and asked for everyone's attention. "I want to say something," she announced, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you all for being my family. Not the family I was born with, but the family I chose, and who chose me back." She paused, looking around the room at all the faces smiling back at her. "Some people think family has to be about blood, but I think family is about love. It's about people who show up when you need them, who like you exactly the way you are, and who make you feel like you belong somewhere." Her eyes found mine across the room, and she smiled. "My mom taught me that sometimes the best things come from the worst things, like how Christmas being ruined turned into the best Christmas ever, and how being left out of one family helped us find a better one." Tyler raised his hand like he was in school, and Sophie giggled. "You don't have to raise your hand, Tyler. I just wanted to say that this is way more fun than most of our family stuff," he said honestly. "Everyone here is really nice, and nobody gets mad if you're loud or excited about things." Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "You children are teaching this old woman that family is not about who you share DNA with, but who you share your heart with." Jake nodded, his arm around Maria. "I never had a little sister growing up, but Sophie has kind of adopted me as her big brother, and this whole group has become like, I don't know, like the family I always wished I had." As the afternoon wore on and people began to leave, each one stopped to thank Sophie specifically for including them, for creating something special, for being exactly who she was. Tyler was the last to leave, and when Jenny came to pick him up, she looked surprised by how happy and relaxed he seemed. "Did you have a good time?" she asked him. "The best time," he said enthusiastically. "Sophie taught me how to make spring rolls, and Jake let me play his guitar, and Mrs. Chen told us stories about when she was a little girl in China, and..." "That sounds wonderful," Jenny said, but her eyes were on me, and I could see something wistful in her expression. Thank you for letting him come, I said quietly as Tyler hugged Sophie goodbye. Thank you for including him. He's been asking about Sophie for weeks, wondering how she's doing. We looked at each other for a moment, and I could see the regret in her eyes, the knowledge of what she'd given up by choosing Brad's comfort over our relationship. Emily, she said softly, what you've built here, it's really special. It is, I agreed, and there's always room for more people who genuinely want to be here. She nodded, understanding the message. The door was still open, but only for people who were ready to fully embrace Sophie as she was. After everyone was gone and the dishes were washed and Sophie was finally in bed, exhausted but glowing with happiness, I sat in my living room thinking about how much had changed since that devastating phone call before Christmas. We'd lost a family, but we'd gained something better. We'd learned that love isn't something you have to earn or prove you deserve. We'd discovered that belonging isn't about fitting into spaces that were never meant for you, but about creating spaces where everyone can be authentically themselves. Sophie padded out of her room in her pajamas, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Mommy, can I sleep with you tonight? I'm too happy to be alone. I smiled and made room for her on the couch. She curled up against me, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the joy of the day. You know what I realized today? Sophie said sleepily. What's that, baby? I used to think there was something wrong with me because our family didn't want me around. But today I realized there was something wrong with them for not seeing how awesome I am. I felt tears prick my eyes. You are pretty awesome. I know, she said with cheerful confidence. And so are you. And so are all our friends. We're like a constellation. A constellation? Yeah, we're all different stars. But when you put us together, we make something beautiful that you can see from really far away. I hugged her tighter, marveling once again at her wisdom, her ability to find poetry in the everyday world. I love that, I whispered. And we're a constellation, the Sophie constellation, she said definitively, because I'm the one who brought everyone together. I laughed softly. You absolutely are. As Sophie drifted off to sleep in my arms, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The pain of Christmas rejection had felt like the end of the world at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of something better. We'd learned that we didn't need other people's approval to be worthy of love. We'd discovered that the most beautiful families are often the ones we choose for ourselves. And most importantly, Sophie had learned that she was exactly the right amount of Sophie. Not too much, not too little, but exactly enough to light up any room she entered. Outside our window, the spring night was full of promise. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new opportunities to love and be loved, new chances to build the life we wanted rather than settling for the life others thought we deserved. We were a constellation now, Sophie and me, and all the people who had chosen to shine alongside us. And we were beautiful. The silence from my original family no longer felt like rejection. It felt like freedom. Freedom to be ourselves, to love without conditions, to create traditions that celebrated rather than criticized who we were. Sophie stirred in her sleep and mumbled something that sounded like, "Best family ever," and I smiled, knowing she was absolutely right. We had found our place in the world, and it was exactly where we belonged.